Hello and welcome to NRI Samay. Wherever around the world listening to this radio channel, a very warm good morning, good afternoon and good evening. I'm your today's host Srikanth from Los Angeles. For decades now, Loksatta as an NGO or as a political outfit has been a strong, sensible, balanced and a sane watchdog, monitoring the functioning of institutions and also helping tighten them up wherever necessary. Under the able leadership of Dr.JP, Jayaprakash Narayan, Loksatta has become a political and institutional knowledge base that, if one follows carefully, can be used as a tool for citizen awakening. Many a times, political parties copy the mission, vision and knowledge that Loksatta dissipates to their own benefit of credit grabbing, and there's no mincing words in saying that it's a bitter truth. Over the past couple of weeks, Dr. JP has been raising voice against two key issues. One is the proposed 17A amendment to the Prevention of Corruption Act and the government of India not criminalizing marital rape. We do have Dr. JP right now with us to talk about the institutional amendments and weigh its pros and cons. By the way, Dr. JP needs no intro. He's the founder of Loksatta Party and also founder and general secretary of Foundation for Democratic Reforms, an independent public policy think tank and a research resource center as well. Dr. JP, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Srikanth. It's my pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So in simple terms, sir, please explain the proposed 17A intrusion to the Prevention of Corruption Act and its implications, sir.
A bit of brief history will be of some help.
Sure.
Some years ago, Government of India gave what is called single directive. What it meant was basically officers of a certain rank, let us say Joint Secretary to Government of India and above, they shall not be investigated, not prosecution, not even be investigated for corruption charges without the government's prior approval. Obviously, that was meant to shield all the high officials in the country, and a lot of people opposed that, including Loksatta, because this is giving a blanket protection to officials. Because there was resistance to that, and courts also said no. Later, they amended the law, actually. Earlier it was by an order. They amended the law to give a similar protection, Section 6A of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. Even that was held unconstitutional by the Supreme Court last year on the ground that it violates rule of law. It treats officers at a senior level different from other public servants. Now, somewhat unwisely, the government has brought in Section 17A, which gives an omnibus protection to everybody in government from investigation by any anti-corruption agency, and a prior sanction of even investigation is required by Lokpal or Lokayukta. I will read the wording for you so that you understand the implications. They say, no police officer shall conduct any investigation into any offence alleged to have been committed by a public servant where the alleged offence is relatable to any recommendation made or decision taken by such public servant in the discharge of his official duties. Basically, what it means is that there cannot be any anti-corruption investigation against anybody from a chaprassu to cabinet secretary in the country without prior sanction of Lokpal or Lokayukta. And the sanction of Lokpal, Lokayukta under the law is a very laborious process, 2 to 3 months it takes, and a very complex process. You must give advance notice to the public servant himself, and then there has to be a process, there has to be a separate inquiry, all kinds of things. So in effect, they made all the CBI and ACB anti-corruption investigations impossible. And we must remember there are 2 crore employees of government in this country. And there are allegations against a significant section of them, maybe 20-25% of them. And in a given year, it's possible that, if you really have strong anti-corruption institutions in the country, it's possible that there will be complaints in lakhs. So if all these lakhs of inquiries, even at the stage of investigation, they go to Lokpal or Lokayukta, those institutions will be totally inundated. They can never handle this. And in the guise of helping anti-corruption process, we're actually hurting it. We're making it impossible. We're giving undue protection to employees and officers in the country. And we are completely enervating, emasculating CBI and ACBs. The government did it very unwisely. Probably their intention is to give protection in cases of policy making, because you cannot question policy making and make it an anti-corruption issue, because that is the prerogative of the elected government.
Right.
But if they simply said this kind of protection is available only for advice and policy making, that would have been okay. But they said advice or recommendation, there are all kinds of actions of all public servants, an omnibus provision, I think they didn't understand the implications. It will destroy the whole fabric of anti-corruption institutions in India.
Right. Sir, fair point. Sir, the country currently doesn't even have a Lokpal, and Lokayukt doesn't seem to have much of the public confidence or whatever, for unfortunate reasons it could be. 17A talks about Lokpal and Lokayukt. Does it make any sense, sir, at this point in time?
You're absolutely right. Lokpal, even if the institution is not created, it's fair to talk about it because there is actually a law which mandates such an institution. We assume that there is an initial delay, and I think recently some efforts are being made to quickly institute Lokpal. But Lokayuktas, there are quite a few states which don't have Lokayukta institutions. And where they exist, like in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, they are very weak institutions, what we sometimes call colorless, orderless, tasteless institutions. They are their namesake. So this law, assuming that there is actually an institution of this kind in every state which is strong and independent, that itself is an error. Obviously, they have done a poor drafting. It is just to overcome, the court's opposition to giving protection to some public servants, and B, to overcome the criticism that government will do it politically. But in the process, we created a messy situation that has to be set right.
Right. So you talked about Lokpal, and last year the government amended the Lokpal bill, and hardly anyone realized it, if I'm right to myself, what I'm talking about. A few of these amendments were the Lokpal chairperson could now be selected from a smaller pool of shortlisted candidates. So the stringent norm of choosing the Lokpal chairperson from a pool of 5 distinguished persons was done away with quietly. And also, the words, the search committee shall, got substituted by the words, the search committee shall as far as possible, making it flexible for the search panel to recommend less than 5 names for the consideration of the post of Lokpal chairperson and less than 3 names for the post of the members. So also, the one last thing that they amended was that the total number of search panel will now be 7 as against to 8. What's your take on this, sir? Why is that? I know that some of these amendments make a lot of sense with the existing norms that were there earlier and now. But what's your take on these amendments on the Lokpal bill, sir?
No, I think these are, I don't really think these are very serious amendments undermining the purpose of the law. They're only out of practical considerations. In India, we have excessive and exaggerated respect for judiciary. In our anxiety to somehow strengthen Lokpal, the law said only a former Chief Justice can be the Lokpal. And the law also said half of the members of the Lokpal institution can only be former Supreme Court judges. Unfortunately, we don't have enough former Supreme Court Chief Justices. So if you want 5 Chief Justices always available, and some of them, the National Human Rights Commission also must be a former Chief Justice. There are a few other institutions where former Chief Justices are enlisted. There is a governor of a state where a former Chief Justice is appointed. So you actually don't have enough former Chief Justices to comprise a short list of candidates. So I think it's to overcome these difficulties that they have done it. I don't think any of these amendments that you cited are fatal to the Lokpal institution. That really doesn't matter in my judgment.
Perfect. So you brought up about judiciary. Of course, loads of pending cases. And on the other side, A. Raja, Kanimoli, Suresh Kalmadi, Gali Janardhan Reddy, Om Prakash Chautala, Jagan Mohan Reddy, all involved in these heinous corruption charges are all out on bail. And now convicted criminals like Sukram, Lalu Prasad Yadav are also on bail. Far worse is Jayalalitha's acquittal. Salman Khan jail and bail the same day, and Amit Shah's acquittal in triple murder cases. All these cases took more than a decade for conviction. A countryman loses faith on judiciary, and this sort of brazen failure of judiciary shows up right in front of their eyes. What's wrong, sir? Do you think the government is serious about handling corruption, sir? Whether government has got anything to do with this judiciary failure, or what is that can be done, sir?
No, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. In the United States, typically about 90 to 95% of criminal cases end up in conviction. A lot of convictions are probably undesirable because of the plea bargaining. Many poor accused, they prefer to enter into a plea bargain, even if they're actually innocent, because they're afraid that in a jury system where they can't afford high-priced lawyers, they may be convicted of a higher offense, and therefore they prefer a smaller offense. And many people are critical of that. In Europe and many developed countries, typically 30 to 40% of the cases end up in conviction. In India, this percentage is only 6% or lower. one of the lowest conviction rates. And even that conviction takes years and sometimes decades. And even after that conviction, as you mentioned in case of Lalu Yadav or Jayalalitha or other cases, Sukhram, etc., even after conviction, they continue to hold public office, they continue to get parole, appeals are unending, and somehow or other they get away. There is one notorious case in the then combined Andhra Pradesh more than 20 years ago, where an official was convicted by the trial court. The conviction was upheld by the High Court. The Supreme Court held the conviction valid, but they said the punishment is too severe. It's an amazing judgment. If at least they said, we don't agree with the conviction because evidence is not satisfactory or something else, I would have understood. They said, yes, conviction is okay, but the punishment is too stiff. And the fellow was brought back to the government as a head of department in a key position with all back wages and all promotions.
Wow.
So things are pretty grim. That's why, when we talk about Lokpal or Lokayukta, when we make assumptions that if only you create a Lokpal, everything will be solved. There's it's one talisman for all the problems of India. That's a very silly approach. We require to strengthen institutions and processes. The crime investigation, the prosecution, then the judicial delays and judicial procedures. For instance, our CBI has only 6,000 all personnel, of them only 2,000 are investigators. Compare this with FBI, which has 60,000 investigators. We simply don't have enough personnel. We don't have enough strength in institutions. And everything is pushed to the CBI. And there are cases where maybe up to 50 to 100 investigators are required in complex cases, some of the more complex cases. So they simply don't have the bandwidth. Similarly, ACBs are very weak, apart from being politically driven. So a lot of things need to be changed. And finally, in Indian conditions, mere imprisonment, even if it's awarded, that perhaps is not enough of a deterrent because nobody is afraid of a prison. As you mentioned, sentences themselves are very rare and light, and they come out on parole even after conviction, etc. But what perhaps would be of greater value would be confiscation of properties, because Indian families live and die for children. The greatest dream is to accumulate property and assets and transfer to children.
Right.
And if there is a realistic fear that those assets cannot be transferred to children, there will be full confiscation of all the assets, current as well as fixed assets. I think that will be of greater value, greater deterrent. So we have to really look at many, many things. There's no one single silver bullet. When the Lokpal movement took place, somehow the people who led the movement and many citizens and media, they pretended as if that one thing will solve all the problems of India. That never happens like that. In real life, we require a large number of robust institutions at every level and practices so that corruption becomes a thing of the past. For instance, Loksatta went to Supreme Court and obtained an order on the 2G spectrum. Everybody was talking about prosecution, jailing, convicting, doing this, that. We said, yes, all that needs to be done, but more important is changing the procedures in future so that natural resources cannot be allocated by discretion. There has to be competitive bidding and transparency.
Right.
We got the order in favor of that. And as a result, 122 licenses were cancelled. As a result, Supreme Court gave a direction that not only in case of 2G spectrum, but in other cases, coal and other natural resources, there must be competitive bidding. The recent bidding you have seen in India, both 2G spectrum and coal bidding, is a result of this order of the Supreme Court on Loksatta petition. So this is not about Lokpal or something. It is about changing the way things are done. So you require many, many instruments to improve integrity in public life. There is no one single answer.
Right. So strong governance, would it control this mess? So let's talk about judiciary. So imagining that a government has got strong conviction to change things, would it really change the entire phase of judiciary, the kind of happenings around, would that change?
It requires time, patience, and cooperation and coordination of many institutions. The investigative agencies, the constitutional authorities, the judiciary, the elected government, all these are required. And also, apart from law, we need to strengthen institutions, as I mentioned, and we need to be innovative in many of our practices, like, for instance, allocation of natural resources, like something like False Claims Act in the United States, where citizens are made partners in the fight against corruption and waste. So a lot of instruments, very carefully designed, are required. And for that, all the branches of government must come together. Unfortunately, there's too much of an adversarial thing. Even the smallest change in India is resisted both by the opposition in parliament and on the street very often by misinformed elements, and of course by courts sometimes exceeding their jurisdiction. So we have a very complex task in making reform happen in this country. But
right.
You're absolutely right. Unless everybody takes it as a national purpose and all of us work in concert, we will not be able to transform India. A mere change of government does not constitute a revolution unless we bring about all these changes together.
Right. Sir, fair enough, sir. And sir, ex-Konkan Railways MD, Sri Rajaram Boji, he was on NRI Samay earlier, and he's been strongly advocating against the Official Secrecy Act. He was mentioning that in all these jargons of Lokpal, Lokayaks, and all the various different, judicial reforms, people are missing a very simple point, that we have a legacy Official Secrecy Act that is ruining the nation. So barring few key entities like defense and foreign policy, etc., he says that there shouldn't be any secrecies, and that the files needs to be opened up. This way, he says, we can avoid corruption even before it happens. Right now, corrupt act happens, and then investigation follows through. In these complex cases, takes more than a decade, and weak and politically influenced institutions do not, bring much the corrupt behind the bars. What do you think about this Official Secrecy Act, sir? Is this something that is actually causing corruption in this country? He mentions on the radio that, it has become a thief and police activity, where a thief will loot and the police will run behind him for almost a decade and then try to ensure that he's convicted, and finally he gets out on bail. He's saying that why not open up all the files? Rajshekhar Reddy has passed on 29 GOs. We have a one-page document, but the data that really mattered was never opened up. Had it been opened up, put it in public domain, we would have avoided all that mess that Rajshekhar Reddy has created while he was the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh. What's your take on this Official Secrecies Act, sir?
No, the broader point that Mr. Rajaram made, that there must be transparency in decision-making and concurrent evaluation and auditing rather than post-mortem after the event, and B, that we must build institutions to enforce integrity rather than look at only punishment. Both these are absolutely valid points. But Official Secrets Act per se is not the problem. Now, after the Right to Information Act is enacted, there is no secrecy in India except those covered by the exemptions under Right to Information Act. Mostly, as you mentioned, national security, foreign relations, if a revelation of some data or information, if it leads to commission of a crime, that sort of a thing. And Official Secrets Act is only applicable to national security issues. And in the Administrative Reforms Commission, I have actually written a report on the Right to Information Act, and there we went into this whole Official Secrets Act very carefully. And what are the changes required in rules and procedures in line with this law and the new regime? We have very carefully given a roadmap. Unfortunately, nobody bothered to follow up these things. But it's not a big thing. It can easily be set right. But the larger point, that transparency is required, that's exactly what the 2G spectrum order that we obtained from Supreme Court is about.
Right.
Not only about this particular case, henceforth all natural resources, including spectrum, shall be allocated competitively and by a transparent process. That sort of institution building actually prevents the crime rather than, as Mr. Rajaram said, wait for the crime to happen and then later on start an investigation, have a lot of publicity, people lose interest after some time. Next government comes to power, they'll scuttle the investigation, and all kinds of things happen. I totally agree with the broader point. It may not be related to Official Secrets Act per se, but the broader point that we have to build a variety of institutions to prevent corruption and loot is absolutely valid. It's bang on target.
All right. Sir, you almost seem to be a watchdog for major institutions, and kudos to all your efforts, sir. The message and the voice of yours in some organic form spreads across, and then people recognize it. So tell us, how different is this NDA government versus the UPA government in terms of functioning of institutions and then strengthening the institutions? Do you see any difference as of date, sir?
There are some healthy and positive signs, undoubtedly. For instance, there appears to be some serious political will to maintain certain standards of probity in public life. The Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and quite a few other ministers, and because of the commitment from the top, there is a desire to both decide quickly and in a non-discretionary manner. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. You take both 2G spectrum auctions, which, to be fair, UPA government started while initially they committed serious blunders. once we got the order from Supreme Court on this Loksatta petition, the UPA government did actually have the first bunch of auctions. Now, the NDA government had the other auctions quickly concluded. But more important, as a result of the Loksatta petition, the the order on Loksatta petition, in line with that, all the coal licenses also were cancelled. And therefore, India had to quickly set that right. And I think the government did a very commendable job, very efficient, very competent, very swift job without keeping it pending for months and years. To that extent, they deserve compliments. But the larger institution building to create a framework of integrity, I think they still haven't gotten the whole thing together. UPA launched the process of mining being transparent. Therefore, the Mining Act is to be amended. And this government, whatever is initially drafted by UPA government, this government quickly put it through Parliament and enacted it. Therefore, one more brick is in place. But other things, the other innovative ideas that are required to transform our governance, I think they still haven't really grappled with that. They're probably too busy with day-to-day decision-making on economic issues and project management and project execution. But the bigger institutional changes, I'm sure, will come. But they must keep their eyes and ears open and look at many institutional changes. Loksatta has made many suggestions to parliamentary committees and to the government itself. Whether they're open to those things or not, we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely, sir. Sir, prior to this, I missed a point. You mentioned about RTI and how citizens can gather some information. At this point in time, the government is not appointing a CVC, CIC. It's been over a year, and I hear that more than 31 lakh cases are pending as far as RTIs are concerned, because there's no CIC, and it has been handed over to the Department of DOPT or something like that, because there's no CIC at this point in time. So what are the implications of not having CIC, CVC? Would that be a dent in the whole process of getting things
Certainly, done? Having institutions but not filling the vacancy, it doesn't really help. It's almost like not having an institution. Though sometimes we also exaggerate it. After all, CIC is not one person. There are many information commissioners. If the Chief Information Commissioner is not there, the senior-most Information Commissioner could actually function as acting Chief Information Commissioner. Therefore, that need not lead to any paralysis. But it becomes an excuse. In our country, even these institutions have become pretty lax. I don't mean to be rude, but unfortunately, many of the bureaucratic institutions, Information Commission, etc., the idea was that they would swiftly address these issues, and their civil service background and administrative experience will make it easy for them to make a judgment call quickly, and they won't have elaborate dilatory procedures like in Judiciary. But unfortunately, in many states, we have evidence to show that Information Commissions sometimes are taking it easy. They have become very citizen unfriendly, inaccessible, slow, very ponderous, and they got all the bad habits of the worst of Judiciary instead of getting the best of Judiciary. So sometimes these are all excuses. But certainly, government and the bureaucracy in particular, who are in charge of these things, initiating the processes, they have certainly failed in quickly getting the appointments made in the country. And let's hope that they will now take stock, because recently they seem to have had meetings of these committees. And let's hope they will not again forget and sleep, but they'll quickly put those things in place.
Right. Sir, one last thing before we log off, sir. Can you share us the documentation of recommendations that you gave to the Parliamentary Standing Committee? Can you summarize what's that you have recommended recently, sir?
There is a constraint, because by custom and by request from Parliament, the submissions made to Parliamentary Committee are not supposed to be made public until the Parliamentary Committee report is given to the Parliament itself.
Okay.
So I'm not at liberty to make it public, but broadly the points I can certainly share. There's nothing earth-shaking about them. The 17-year you mentioned is certainly one important point, right, which recently was introduced as an official amendment to the Prevention of Corruption Act by the government. We've discussed it adequately today.
Right.
Then you also mentioned in your introduction, an innocuous provision is added, seemingly nice, but actually it's hurtful to the anti-corruption fight. And that is, the bribe giver shall be prosecuted in every single case. There is a fashionable idea prevalent in India. Many people talk, on more high moral tones and say every bribe giver is actually as bad as bribe taker. This is absolute nonsense. I'm using strong language so that the listeners and others, they will actually look at it very seriously. There are two classes of corruption. One is collusive corruption. The corruption where the bribe giver and bribe taker are colluding to defraud the country and both are benefiting is collusive corruption. That is where 2G spectrum license are obtained, mining license are given, contracts are given without competition, that kind of land allocation is made without any rhyme or reason, that sort of a thing. But a large number of cases of corruption where you and I are involved as citizens, they are cases of extortionary corruption, where we are entitled to get what is due in any country like the United States or other countries. It happens routinely. A birth certificate, a land record, a Patadar passbook, a passport, a ration card, or something else. It's a matter of right. And yet in our country there is so much of harassment, delay, humiliation, and loss of opportunity and time that most citizens feel compelled to give a bribe of 50, 100, 200 rupees, whatever is the going rate, to get things done. Now, in those cases, the citizens who are paying bribes are victims. They are not villains. To criminalize that activity is only driving all corruption underground and therefore making it impossible to end corruption. It appears to be a moral high ground, but it's nonsensical. It's actually undermining our institutions. So this is another thing that we told them clearly. Then about the Lokpal Act, some of the amendments that they have proposed, there are some serious problems. We gave them alternatives. For instance, appointment of Director of Prosecutions. They have talked about only a civil servant being made a director. Only if a civil servant with adequate experience is not available shall they look for fine jurists in the market. Very typically Indian. Everybody wants monopoly in government. Instead of getting the best in the country, they want to retain the status quo and monopoly of the existing civil servants. We urge the parliamentary committee to look at that seriously. Then confiscation provisions are very weak in the existing law. So we asked them to look at a law enacted in India in respect of smugglers and foreign exchange manipulators, SAFIMA Act of 1976. It was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1988. Supreme Court also specifically made a comment that confiscation of properties of corrupt public servants must be in line with that act, which is very strong. But government is not acting, so we urge the parliamentary committee to look at that. And of course, as I mentioned today, the need for strengthening the CBI and ACBs in the country. It's not enough to strengthen the law. Actually, we must strengthen the institutions on that and a few other relevant issues. Let's hope that the parliamentary committee will take note, because this is not the first time we appeared before them. They're very familiar with what we're saying. They're also appreciative of Loksatta's efforts. In fact, the committee's chairman publicly acknowledged Loksatta's contribution in enactment of these laws and improvement of these laws. Let's hope they'll take note of these things.
Wonderful, sir. Great effort. And, sir, I really want to sincerely thank you for all the time that you've taken explaining and all the various different facets of institutions, the fallouts, and also the functioning and good parts of the whole process. So thank you so much for your time today, sir.
My pleasure, Srikanth. My only appeal is,
yes,
let's not lose hope. Sometimes things appear pretty bad.
Right.
But every country went through these processes, and real big changes take time, patience, professionalism, perseverance, and optimism, rather than cynicism and blaming somebody all the time. It's not always because the other fellows are villains things are happening. It's because they didn't pay attention, not enough people really supported when the time came. And when good change is also proposed by any government, UP or NDA, the opposition thinks it's their moral duty to oppose always, no matter what happens to the country. So there's a climate created. We have to overcome that systematically, and we have to persevere. Loksatta got at least about 10 to 12 big changes in the country over the past 19 years. 3 of them are constitutional amendments. It's because we persevere. We are professional, we are systematic, we are thorough, we don't give up, and we don't look for 15 minutes of fame. We pursue it by whatever means, in whatever manner, with all parties, with all governments and parliamentary institutions and other institutions systematically, and eventually things do happen. There's no other way. Nations change that way, and I'm sure India too will change in terms of corruption and many other sectors in the country. And let's not lose hope. And I only appeal to people to go into details and see how the systems prevailed in other countries which are very successful, and what are the best practices that can be adapted in India. Not everything can be suitable to our country, but we can always look at those things and see what is the best answer to our problems. And we will prevail eventually. This country will be better off, but it requires a lot of citizen effort, systematic effort. And that's what all of us together are doing, and I'm very happy for all your collective interest, and I'm sure that we'll make a difference in the coming years.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. For the past decade, that's what you've been advocating, and I've been hearing on multiple forums the same thing. And spreading this sort of positive messaging, even because the youngsters in the country is outgrowing right now, and this sort of mindset where we don't end up in the cynicism part of the whole process and work through this process is very, very, very crucial for development, overall development of the nation. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you, Srikanth. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. So friends, that was Dr. JP talking about various current issues especially the proposed move by the central government to incorporate Section 17A and the Prevention of Corruption Act that will render investigating agencies such as CBI and ACB ineffective. So Dr. JP says Section 17A would make it imperative for the investigative agencies to take prior permission of the government for investigation of corruption charges against government employees from a clerk to a high-level official. Such a proposal would undermine the Lokpal and the fight against corruption, as Dr. JP says. Once again, thanks to Dr. JP and to everyone listening to this show. We do appreciate your time. So do check out www.nrisamay.com and also listen to all our shows on youtube.com/NRI Samay. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com NRI Samay, and Twitter, NRI Samay. Have a wonderful weekend, friends. Thanks. Bye.